Hello. How are you? Happy Saturday. I still don't know how to pin my comments, and frankly, I don't know. I don't know I don't know how to do it. So, I post a topic which is I'm going to be discussing. Hi Faye, how are you? Hi Stephanie, how are you? I'm going to be discussing World Bipolar Day because today is World Bipolar Day, which is March 30th. Um, and that's what we're going to be talking about. So, as you know, I have been diagnosed with, well, let me introduce who I am before I start talking about what I have and what I live with and all that stuff. So my name is Andrian, and I am the face behind Beautiful Brain Collective. I am a mental health advocate and blogger. I blog for the International Bipolar Foundation, and I also blog for myself and some other blogs. So my main mission is to end the stigma surrounding mental health and mental illness. And I help women realize that they can live their best lives despite a mental health diagnosis. So today is World Bipolar Day, and I thought it would be really great to come on and talk about bipolar disorder and demystify some of the myths that people have about bipolar disorder, because I know that there's a lot of untrue things that are going around about bipolar disorder, and some people just don't have the correct information. And since I've been dealing with bipolar disorder for a long time, I was diagnosed back in 2014, but I've been living with it for longer than that. I wanted to share, my experiences with it, and then also give some statistics and information that would maybe shed some light and open up your eyes to what bipolar disorder is, so that you walk away a little more informed about what the disorder is. So, let me just take a swig of water before I start talking. So, I did some research because just like any illness or disease, it will affect different people differently. And I think that's important. That's important to know. Each disease, each illness will affect each person differently. So let me just give you a little bit of information about what World Bipolar Day is. It's celebrated every year on March 30th. And March 30th happens to be the birthday of Vincent van Gogh, the famous artist who was posthumous. I can't even say it. He was diagnosed after he died. That's what the word means, as having bipolar disorder. So after he died, years later, he was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So that's why it's celebrated on March 30th, which is the day of his birth. So bipolar disorder, according to the International Bipolar Foundation, is a brain illness that causes unusual fluctuations in a person's mood. So it's not just like a regular person who, gets sad and down or gets upset. These are unusual fluctuations, and they're severe. So the severe changes can affect all aspects of a person's life. It can affect their work, it can affect their relationships, it can affect their school performance, and with some people, it can include substance abuse problems, and also may include suicide attempts. So, since this is an illness of the brain, there are chemical and structural changes that does happen. With bipolar, there are imbalances in serotonin, dopamine, and neuroadrenaline. So there are some actual things that goes on in the brain. It's just that we can't see them, but they are happening in the brain. So a lot of times people will refer to bipolar disorder as an invisible illness. And that's simply because we can't see what's going on to the brain, but the symptoms will manifest themselves physically. So a lot of times, certain mental illnesses will, a lot of them will be described as an invisible illness. The person will experience unusually intense emotional states that occur in distinct periods called mood episodes. So, a manic episode is when a person is overly joyful or has an excited state. And a depressive episode is when a person is extremely low, sad, or hopeless. And so I have this book that I got from the International Bipolar Foundation, and I just want to read some examples of what a manic state is, or manic symptoms are for you, just so you can get an idea of how severe the changes are. Because sometimes people will say, oh, she's bipolar, she's being bipolar, and it's nothing like being bipolar. So manic symptoms would be experiencing overly happy or outgoing mood for a long period of time, being severely irritable, talking quickly, rapidly, transitioning different ideas during conversations, or having racing thoughts. So if you're having a conversation with a person that's in a manic episode, you're talking about one subject, and then they just switch the conversation and they start talking about 3 or 4 different things in a matter of 5 or 10 minutes. So that is an example of a manic episode. Let's see. There's an inability to focus. They start new or numerous activities or projects at one time. Most of the time, they are not finishing the project. So they'll start, this project, they'll start that project. They want to start all these things, but then they're not able to finish them because then they're on to something else. It's almost like they can't focus on one task, but then their attention gets diverted to the second task or the third task or the fourth task. So there's always, the need to just do many things at one time. Feeling very fidgety could be a symptom of a manic episode, or sleeping too little or not at all. So during a manic episode, a person may not get any sleep, or they may not get enough sleep. So sleeping, a couple hours a night, or not sleeping at all. So those are some symptoms of a manic episode. And then being impulsive, acting impulsively and partaking in dangerous behaviors. That's being hypersexual. Hey, you're here. Thank you. Acting impulsively and partaking in dangerous behavior. That includes, hypersexuality, having relations with, strangers, or, drug use, or alcohol. So any of those kinds of things may characterize a manic episode. And then let me just go ahead and just describe to you some of the symptoms of a depressive episode. Again, all of these symptoms may not be present in any one person. These are just some of the symptoms. So again, the disease hits each person differently, but these are symptoms that can occur. So I just want to point that out. So a depressive episode could be feeling down, tired, slowed down, having problems concentrating, having problems remembering or making decisions, being restless or irritable, changing eating habits or sleeping habits, thinking death, suicide, or attempting suicide. So it's not just being sad or, you know, feeling depressed. These episodes could last for long periods of time. That's another thing that needs to be pointed out. These episodes last for days or weeks. So that's why it's really important to be diagnosed and to see a mental health professional so that so that they can assess your situation and let you know if there is a problem that needs further looking after. So I just wanted to point those symptoms out to you so that if you know somebody or maybe you yourself are experiencing any of those, you may want to talk to somebody so that you can just, figure out what's going on, because these are extreme cases. These aren't just, I wasn't feeling well today, I was a little sad today. That's not what a bipolar depressive symptom is. It's I was down for like a week or 2 weeks. That's what a depressive symptom would feel like. I wanted to really go over, I feel like one of the things that is really important to talk about for me is some of the myths that people have when they talk about mental illness and specifically bipolar disorder. Some of the myths that are also prevalent in terms of that go hand in hand with the stigma. Some of the myths that are present, and I'm just going to go through the list, and maybe, if you guys have heard of any of the myths or if you agree with some of them, that's fine. If you don't agree with them, that's also fine. But here are some of the myths that, in my research I've come across. And let me know what you think as I'm reading these off to you. So some of the myths that I've come across are when you take medication, you're cured. That's not true. Bipolar disorder is an illness. It's a chronic illness that stays with you for the rest of your life. And so when you take medication, it just helps you manage it, and it helps you, it's bearable for you. So it doesn't mean that you're cured. Once you take medicine, you have to remain on the medicine. And that's why it's important to have a mental health care team that can work with you and manage your medications and your treatment to the best of their ability, and also what's going to be helpful for you, because again, every person is different, and what works for me might not be what will work best for the next person. So that's one myth, that medication cures you, and it doesn't. People with bipolar disorder can't be successful, which is a complete myth. And I just wanted to point out to you that there are several celebrities who have come out and have discussed their bipolar disorder. And I just wanted to point out some of them people who have talked about bipolar disorder, having bipolar disorder. Some of them you may know, some of them you may not know, but Mariah Carey has come forward and discussed her bipolar disorder. Demi Lovato, Mel Gibson, Carrie Fisher, who was Princess Leia in Star Wars. I think she was in Star Wars. Russell Brand, the comedian. Catherine Zeta-Jones. Frank Bruno, who is a boxer from England. He is very vocal on his struggles with bipolar disorder. Kanye West has kind of been on the fence about his diagnosis. He talks about it, then he takes it away, and so he has mentioned it. Jane Pauley, the reporter, Virginia Woolf, the writer, she has talked about her struggles, as well as Ernest Hemingway. So there are many people who are in the public eye who have discussed their struggles with bipolar disorder. So that goes to another point that I want to make, that mental health disorders and mental illnesses can strike anyone. It doesn't discriminate race, age, class, rich, poor, old, young, doesn't discriminate. It Anyone can be susceptible to a mental health disorder. So I wanted to put that out there as well. And in some of my research that I've come across, I think there's still more research to be done, but it suggests that there is a creativity connection with bipolar. So some of the research suggests that there is a creativity connection with people that have bipolar disorder. So I just wanted to point that out also. Does anybody have any questions or comments right now at this point? Does anybody have any questions or anything? No? Yes? Okay. So I can finish my list. Let me get back to my list of myths. Having bipolar disorder does not mean you have split personalities. That is not what it means. That's completely false. It just means that there are extremes of the same personality, and you feel extreme parts of the same personality. So it's not like, on Friday, I'm Andrian, and on Saturday, I'm Mary. That's not true. That is not true. So people with bipolar disorder does not have split personalities, and that's not true. People with bipolar disorder are just being dramatic. That's not true. Also, we're not just being dramatic. We cannot help the way we feel. What is important to know is that we need support, we want support, but we don't want to be judged. It's very hard to express how we're feeling if we're going to be labeled as being dramatic or as being overly sensitive. It's very hard to express our feelings when we're being labeled as dramatic or as overly sensitive. So, that's another myth that needs to be dispelled, is that people with bipolar disorder are being dramatic. Another myth that I have come into contact with is every bad day is an episode, and that's not true. Every bad day is not an episode. Everybody has bad days, even people with bipolar disorder. A bad day can just be a bad day. It doesn't mean that, I'm manic today or, I'm depressive today. No, I could just have a bad day. I experience regular emotions just like everyone else. Negative emotions and positive emotions. And everything isn't related to bipolar. Sometimes people who don't have the information about bipolar disorder automatically assume that everything is about bipolar disorder, and it's not. So that's another thing that I think people need to realize, is that everything isn't related to bipolar disorder. You know what I mean? I get upset, and sometimes it's not a manic episode. It's just I'm upset about something, and that's okay. If I didn't have bipolar disorder, it would be okay if I was upset. It's just because there's this label, there's this bipolar disorder there. It seems like it's okay to just that be the first line of defense. Oh, she's bipolar, so she must be having a moment. And so that's really unfair, and most of the times it's really untrue. And one of the last myths that I think I've heard and I've experienced as well is that you can't maintain healthy relationships with bipolar disorder. Now, I have talked about previously about therapists who aren't well trained in dealing with people that have bipolar disorder. I actually had I went to a therapist who wasn't well trained in dealing with people with bipolar disorder, and he made some comments about people with this illness aren't good in relationships, and was very insensitive, number one, and number two, That's not true. People can maintain healthy relationships. It just takes education, and it takes management, and it takes work on both the parts of both parties. So that's not true that people can't maintain healthy relationships. It just takes work, and it takes some knowledge of yourself, and then it also takes knowledge of the other person who's in the relationship also. So that's another myth that needs to be dispelled. It is a difficult illness to deal with when you're first diagnosed, because everything, it's like a whirlwind. You don't know what's going on, but once you make the decision to begin treatment, and you figure out, triggers, and you figure out what treatment works for you, then it becomes more manageable and easier to live with and easier to work with. That's what I wanted to say about that. So I just wanted to give a couple more statistics on bipolar disorder really quickly. It affects about 60 million people worldwide and about 6 million people in America. It is a lifelong illness that must be treated through the course of a person's life. And it's a chronic illness, just like heart disease and just like diabetes. Those are chronic illnesses that need to be treated, and that's the same as bipolar disorder. The average age of onset is around 25 years old, and I know that to be true because the onset for me was around 24, but I wasn't formally diagnosed until I was about 36. So for about 12 years, I just was out of control and suffered for all of that time and didn't know what was wrong with me until I saw a psychiatrist to formally diagnose me 12 years later. Possible causes could be genetics, stress, change in brain structure and function. Bipolar disorder affects everyone differently, and every person will have a different experience with the illness, just like I said earlier. That's why it's so important to find a treatment plan and a team who will work with you to come up with a plan that is specialized for you. Whether it is therapy, whether that is medication, whatever it is, it has to be specialized for you to get the best results. So just wanted to briefly share my story, which I started to talk about. And so the symptoms showed themselves around age 24. So, I went through a terrible manic episode around 24. I lost my mother, and it was like a really traumatic time for me. I spent a god awful amount of money, hundreds of thousands of dollars, and I was manic. I was up, I was down, I was depressed. I was doing like really awful things. And it wasn't until age 36 that I went to a psychiatrist and I was formally diagnosed with bipolar disorder. Now, it wasn't right then and there that I was just like, oh, okay, this is fine, this is great. But I was in denial for a couple of years because of the stigma that is so prevalent. Because when we hear about mental illnesses or mental health disorders, we automatically go to this person's crazy, or this person's psycho, or all of that stuff. So you don't want to accept that, because then you'll fall into that trap of, oh, you're crazy, or, all of that. So I didn't accept the diagnosis for a long time, and it just made things even worse. So it wasn't for a couple of years that I was ready to accept the diagnosis. Once I accepted the diagnosis, that's when the recovery period started. And so with the recovery period, I was able to find a psychiatrist, a therapist, and then make a complete lifestyle change. So I talk about lifestyle change in conjunction with mental health recovery, because mental health recovery is a complete lifestyle change. It's not just taking a pill. It's not just going to see a therapist. It's a whole lifestyle overhaul. And that's the way, for me, that I've gotten the best results in dealing with the bipolar disorder. So that's pretty much my story in a nutshell. I think that the important thing to notice here, or to know here, is that it's okay to talk about it. It's okay to know that you're not alone. I think so many people live in shame and struggle in silence, and all that's not necessary, because there's so many other people who are going through these things and are going through them alone. There's so many smart, intelligent, talented people who have mental health disorders, but they just need a little bit of help. They need a little bit of help, and they need information. And then the people who are the supporters and the caregivers and the caregivers, they also need information as well, because it is difficult when you're a caregiver of someone who has a mental health disorder, because it's hard and you don't know what to do. But there's information out there, and it can be done, because there are so many other people that have done it. And that's pretty much it. I mean, I'm not going to sit here and say, oh, it's like a walk in the park. It's not a walk in the park. I was a freaking train wreck for a long time. But what I can say is, you're not doomed. It's not a death sentence. But it does take a lot of work. And when you make the decision that you want to recover, you want to get better, you want to live a life that is that you deserve to have a normal life, you deserve to have a happy life, you deserve to feel normal, you deserve not to be 1 minute high up here on 10,000, and then the next minute low down here on negative 10,000. You deserve to be right here. So that's what mental health recovery is about, and that's what getting treatment is about. So I just like to tell people that it's not a walk in the park, but it's possible. So that's why I wanted to share this story with everyone and all these statistics today for World Bipolar Day. So that is that. It's 1:30. That's good. I made good time. So that's it. Does anybody have any questions? While I'm waiting for you guys, if you have any questions, or if you don't have any questions, that's fine. I did a podcast interview last week, or was it a week and a half ago? I think it was with Swoop Radio, and I talked about mental health recovery. Thank you. It was, I talked about mental health recovery. And if you want to take a listen to it, it's pretty cool. The link is in my Instagram bio, so please feel free to check that out. And if there are no... Thank you, Tori. If there are no questions, I'm going to end this because I need to take a nap. And thank you for everybody that joined in. I know this was like a weird time of day, because it's like smack dab in the middle of the day. And I usually do this later on during the day. So, thank you very much. Okay, no questions. I'm going to get off of here. Thank you all. Hi, Faye. Thank you all. Thank you for coming on. I really appreciate it. And I hope you guys have a really great Saturday. I plan on doing the same after I have a nap, because I need to have a nap. Yeah. So I will talk to you guys soon. Thank you. Thank you. I'll talk to you guys later. Bye.